Well, welcome everybody to today's webinar, 6 Steps to Prepare Your Company for CMMC 2. I'm Howard Friedman, Senior Managing Director of Strategy here at Ascent Solutions, and I will be moderating today's webinar. Before I introduce our panelists, I'd like to remind everybody that today's webinar is being recorded and that we will send a link afterwards to rewatch or share with others. Also, we have disabled video and audio for today's webinar, but encourage everyone to drop questions into the chat at any time, and we'll make sure to answer those as we see them. We'll also open up for questions at the end if you'd like to share those at that time. All right, now I'd like to introduce Kayne McGladrey, Ascent's Strategy and GRC Practice Leader. Kayne?
Thanks for having me on, Howard. I appreciate it. I'm excited to chat about one of my favorite topics today, the Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification.
Excellent. Thank you. And just as a reminder for everybody, this will be more of a Q&A session. So we've got a number of questions prepared, as well as we've got some in ahead of time from folks. So first question to you, Kayne. What is CMMC 2 and to whom does it apply?
So CMMC is the Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification. Level 2 is the most recent and likely visible final implementation of it. At a very high level, CMMC incorporates 3 levels. Level 1 is a series of 17 basic cybersecurity controls, things like having an antivirus scanner or having multi-factor authentication so you can identify your end users or knowing where your data are stored. Level 2 is a series of 110 cybersecurity controls. That is a considerable step up, and that's based on NIST 800-171. And then level 3 is a combination of NIST 800-171 and NIST 800-172, as well as some as yet undefined secret sauce that DIBCAC is going to be adding at some future date. I think a lot of the market emphasis right now has been in locking down CMMC level 2. And the rationale behind that is that under CMMC level 1, you can do a self-assessment. So you can, there's a self-assessment guide, you can download it from the internet, you can, from the CMMC ABs, that's the CMMC Accreditation Board, from their website, and it says, here's how to do your self-assessment. Level 2 is probably a formal third-party assessment, and that requires a lot more preparation. And then level 3 involves a formal assessment by our DIBCAC, which is the Defense Industrial Base Certification AC, which I never remember the other two. Anyway, if you've worked with DIBCAC before, you kind of know who they are. They're a formal government entity. Howard, does that help for just kind of setting the table for what CMMC level 2 is? I think the other part of your question, though, is who it applies to, right?
Correct.
All right, cool. So the for level 1, if you're doing business with the Department of Defense, it's kind of a full stop right there. If you're doing business with the Department of Defense as a supplier, as part of the supply chain, as maybe you do services for them as well, like you could be doing landscaping services, for example, or you could be making sure that commissaries have fresh eggs. You're still going to have CMMC level 1 requirements if you have federal contract information. That's FCI, and my apologies for today's acronym soup. If you've got your can of alphabet soup, we will fill out the whole can easily. So if you've got a federal contract that says I do landscaping services for the federal government, and maybe you've got a contract and you've got proof of payment, you're probably going to have some stuff that's classified as FCI. You have to have those 17 cybersecurity controls, but honestly, I think you should probably have antivirus on your system anyway, right? You got a computer, you should probably have some antivirus on it. You should probably know who's logging into your computer. Seems like a good idea. Level 2 is where it gets a lot more interesting. So if you are in possession of controlled unclassified information, that's CUI or CUI, as it's sometimes jokingly called. If you've got possession of CUI, that means you're going to have CMMC level 2. The way of looking at do I have CUI is, did the government send you something that's marked as CUI on it? Or has your contracting officer told you, hey, yo, this is cooey? The other way, if you want to look at it, another approach, does CMMC Level 2 apply to my organization? Read through your contracts and look to see if you have DFARS, that's DFAIRS, 252.204-7019, 7019. Now, admittedly, this involves reading contracts. But if you go look through your contracts that you currently have with the federal government that says, hey, we've got a DFARS 252.204-7019 clause in there, you also are going to have CMMC Level 2 requirements. And that's if it's a existing contract that you signed 2 years ago and is up for renewal, or if that's a contract that you're currently bidding on. Again, that 7019 clause means CMMC Level 2. If you are CMMC Level 3, you probably already know it. You are working at an organization that makes not just assemblies. You're not just doing tooling. You're actually building weapon systems, or you're building cyber weapon systems, or you're building mission vehicles, or you're building aligned, like, big assets at that point. So if you're working at a company like, I don't know, pick on Lockheed or Raytheon, for example, yeah, you're probably a prime on a lot of contracts. You're going to probably have CMMC Level 3.
Interesting. What I did find interesting though too is when you went through level 1, 2, and 3. Level 1 is landscapers. Like you're going to have to pay somewhat attention. I feel like what we hear from the industry is more of the Raytheons and not enough of the the landscapers. So that was a interesting breakdown of those two. So thank you very much for that. The second question we have is, when will CMMC be a contract requirement?
So there's been a lot of speculation on this, and I go to primary sources on this more than anything else. I think there's a tendency to say CMMC Level 2 doesn't happen right now. There's a quote on screen there from Stacy Bostjanik. So Stacy is the director of CMMC policy at the Department of Defense's Undersecretary of Defense for Acquisition and Sustainment. So that's a primary source there. And what she's saying is that, well, there's a few things she said in addition to this. So let's unpack them all. So right now, CMMC is probably undergoing tabletop exercises with the Defense Industrial Base and the Department of Defense either this month or next month, so June of 2022 or July of 2022. And that's really to test out CMMC Level 2 and to get feedback. Now, the fact that she's made a public statement that says, the Department of Defense is saying, we're going to start this, that is them drawing a line in the sand. And then them saying that they expect it's going to be available for public comment in March 2023 means that typically there's a 60-day public comment window as shown on the quote there. So what that means is, honestly, public comment is probably not going to shut this thing down. There's not going to be a massive material change to CMMC Level 2 or to CMC at all as a consequence of that. And so if you go forward from March 2023, you're saying, okay, that's about summer-ish or so. The other thing is Kelly Fletcher, who is the Principal Deputy Chief Information Officer, the CIO at the Department of Defense, again, very senior level official here, has said that, has doubled down and said, look, the plans for us to send CMMC Level 2 to the OMB, that's the U.S. Office of Management and Budget, for public comment in 2023, in March specifically. And again, so now we've got two very high-level officials who are definitely in the know, saying this is the market guidance we're giving. So I don't see any reason why we would not start seeing CMMC Level 2 and Level 1, just CMMC 2.0 really, start taking effect in summer of 2023. And again, if you think about that contractual requirement, that DFARS, that 7019 clause specifically, if you signed a contract yesterday, and you won that contract. That's cool. First of all, congratulations. Second of all, it means that in summer of next year, if that contract is on for a 1-year renewal, you're going to be doing your contractual renewal likely under CMMC Level 2 requirements. And then it'll be just a question of like which level. And if you've got that 7019 contract in there, you're going to be doing a CMMC Level 2 renewal, which is those 110 controls that you need to build towards.
Yeah, interesting. So it sounds like from landscaper to missile builder, one way or another, you're probably at about 12-month
Yes,
countdown
and
clock.
anyone else in that supply chain. So if you're a subcontractor, if you do assemblies, right, you're you're assembling interesting things, you're going to have CMMC because you're doing that for a prime. If you're just building parts, if all you do is you make screws and you make fittings all day, and you're doing that under a contractual vehicle from a subcontractor to a prime, um, odds are you'll still probably have CMMC level 1 requirements in there, if not level 2, depending on where they've set the boundary for the information that subcontractor is sharing to your organization as a subcontractor.
Yeah, I did like what you said though from the previous question about level 1. Like those are I like to call them mom and apple pie things. You should probably have AV on it. Like you should be doing
Yes.
this to prep for this so that you're ready in case you are level 1. But at the same time, do it. It's part of your your requirements for being a good company is you should have these things out there.
Yes.
Excellent, thank you. Another question here. What are the risks of not being CMMC certified?
So the biggest one is that your contract doesn't get renewed. I think that more than anything else, the loss of revenue associated with not having a CMMC certification becomes material, because if you go to renew, like let's say you're on a 3-year contractual renewal cycle, when that comes up, if that comes up in 2024, okay, first of all, good news, you've got some runway to at least address any control deficiencies between today and 2024, but also it's going to become a limiting factor if your organization wants to bid on new business. So if there's an RFP put out to the market and it says, hey, this has got CMMC level 2 requirements and it goes up in June 2023, you can certainly bid on it, but when you go to win it, or before you win it, as part of the process, the contracting officer is going to say, okay, show me your CMMC certification. I think in the early days, because not everybody's going to be CMMC certified in the very early days, I think they might also just look at your SPURS score, which is the supplier performance system that's maintained by the Navy. And if you know what a SPURS score is, good on you. You've probably been filing your SPURS scores already through SPURS. They're going to look at that. And odds are, because SPURS is interesting, SPURS goes from a score on the low end of -204 to a high end of 110. So word on the street is that most contracting officers in the early days aren't going to accept a score of less than 0. So and the reason why, if you think about professional blowback, if they issue a contract to an organization that has a breach and they had a score of -20, everybody's going to be giving them the askance glance and saying, why did you authorize this? Now, if you've got a perfect 110 and you can attest to that and you can verify that and you can have a senior executive sign off, which is required under CMMC level 2, that says, hey, yo, we're 110, easy day, right? You're going to be winning bids provided your pricing and other factors align to the mission. But if you've got a score of 0 or less, you're going to have a very hard time of it.
Interesting. Okay, next question. What are the biggest challenges you're seeing in the market right now? So obviously you've been talking to a lot of customers, you've been talking to peers in the market, you've been giving a lot of discussion on this. What's the biggest challenges you're seeing right now for companies to achieve CMMC certifications that, obviously that about because you referenced there's some stuff that's still a little bit of a TBD, but for what's in there, what are those challenges and what do you recommend companies do to prepare today with this countdown clock going on?
So I think one of the biggest challenges that folks have to overcome is not technical in nature, and it is the belief that this is not happening.
Hmm.
Now, if I had a really good crystal ball, I would have sold my Bitcoin 3 months ago. right? I think all of us would have sold, or if you held Bitcoin, you know that joke where it was at its peak because right now it's in a trough. And I don't have a very good crystal ball. I also don't have any Bitcoin. And I make that analogy because there's a tendency to say, well, CMMC level 1 didn't happen, right? So maybe CMMC 2 isn't going to happen as well. And there's this tendency to believe we can predict or influence the future that organizations have that is causing them to not invest in working as though CMMC is going to happen. And the danger associated with that isn't just regulatory in nature. The reason we have CMMC at a core is because companies in all industries are struggling with cybersecurity, right? This is not unique to the defense industrial base, just the defense industrial base is subject to this particular regulatory matter of the CMMC. And as such, it's good cybersecurity practice, right? So everything that's in NIST 800-171, which is that 110 controls, all of those are good things that we know reduces cyber risk. All of those are things that if you were to go to your cyber insurance broker and say, hey, look, we're doing everything in NIST 800-171. You want to give us a discount? If you've got a smart insurance broker, they're going to go, heck yeah. If you have a middle tier insurance broker, they're going to go, that still sounds pretty good. Sounds like you're doing the right things. And if you do get a non-answer from them, I'd suggest switching insurance brokers, honestly, at that point, because NIST 800-171 is not, it's a non-trivial amount of work, but it is effectively table stakes for modern cybersecurity. So setting aside the cultural issue of hoping that this thing will go away, which, like I say, that's probably the biggest risk. The other thing is figuring out where you are, where your organization is from a CMMC perspective. Are you level 1, level 2, or level 3? Odds are if you're level 3, you already know it. If you're on level 2, then um, building out 110 controls is not something you can technology your way out of it. You can't go out to a vendor, even though there is a vendor out there that will tell you that you can buy CMMC in a box from them effectively, and you'll get a perfect score of 110. That's not how reality works. This is not just a tooling thing. The way that auditors' minds work is if it's not written down, if they can't see it, if they can't touch it, and if it isn't written down how it works, it just functionally doesn't exist. And so a lot of what's in CMMC level 2 is around process documentation. A lot of it's around policy documentation. A lot of it's stuff that like we already know how to do. Like, how do you create a new user account? We know how to do that, right? Most organizations know how to do that. They do it regularly. Did they write it down? Well, maybe it's written down in a OneNote, or maybe it's written down in their knowledge management system, or maybe it's written down somewhere else, but is it actually formally documented? And would that survive an auditor rolling up and saying, show me how that works again? And that's that level of detail that we really do need to get to. And that, as well as potential gaps that organizations might have for things that they're not doing. For example, there is vulnerability scanning, right? Are you actively scanning your assets for vulnerabilities? That presupposes you have your assets defined. That presupposes you're doing asset scanning. And so you start building this chain where if you don't meet certain core things, you can't meet the higher order controls. And so in general, most organizations, I think that they really need about a year for a mid-size organization that's going for level 2 certification. They need about a year to do it. And I've spoken about controls. In terms of stuff that I'd recommend that companies do, to your other part of your question, I think the first thing to do would be do we have that slide about the 5 pointers? Boy, that's a nice chart. Okay, at least it'll be in the recording. So under SPURS, there are, because there are 110 controls, and there's not a one-to-one mapping. It's not like one control is worth 1 point. 44 of those controls are actually worth 5 points each. So if you're starting today, I'd say start, and this is all in NIST 800-171. You don't need to go find some fancy CMMC document. You don't certainly need some, additional stuff. It's right in NIST 800-171 and it's there. So go do those things first. Make sure you've got those ones down. And there's things in there like multi-factor authentication, which we've seen empirically reduces risk associated with account takeovers and also reduces the risk of ransomware as a secondary benefit. So I'd say get those 44 controls pinned in first. Like make sure you have technology, make sure you've got documentation. And the other thing I'd say beyond those 44 controls, and thank you for, we could probably leave that up for just a moment. We're sending out the recording so folks don't have to take notes and furiously secure these down. The other thing is have a system security plan. And this is one of those things where I have had a lot of conversations with clients that have been filing their SPURS score um, and not recognizing that they need a system security plan, an SSP. And an SSP, NIST has a template for that. You can just search for NIST SSP. It's a fairly Spartan template, but of course it's a template. And that system security plan is a definition of all of the controls, how they align to your environment. So for multi-factor authentication, for example, how are you doing multi-factor authentication? And are you doing conditional risks associated with your end users to do step-up based authentication when a user does something anomalous, right? You write all of that stuff down, you put it into your system security plan, easy day. If you don't have a system security plan, you can't file under SPURS. Like the system will allow you to, it'll assume you've got a system security plan. SPURS doesn't ask you to, hey, can you upload a copy of your system security plan? It presupposes you have one. If you don't have one, what that means in functional terms is any SPURS scores that you've been filing over the years that we've been doing this probably aren't quite correct, because if you don't have a SSP, you get an immediate fail. So get that locked into. And just those 44 controls and having an SSP, I wouldn't say that's less than 3 months of work for most organizations. After that, that's 44 controls. The rest of the controls under NIST 800-171, there's 56 of them. They're anywhere between 1 point and 3 point. Again, thinking if I want to get my score above the 0 mark, you want to hit all the 3-pointers, and then you want to hit the 1-pointers and kind of do them in that priority order. That's kind of the easiest way of looking at it. An alternate way that we've helped our clients with is to say, okay, so here's the control gaps at the 5, the 3, and the 1. Let's do a threat analysis and see what threat actors are engaging with our organization and how they're engaging with our organization. And that's a combination of looking at telemetry like log files, as well as open source intelligence, right? And then to put together a 6-month plan to address controls based on threat priority and points. So if you've got a 5-pointer that also will shut off a known attack from a known advanced persistent threat or just a general garden variety cyber criminal gang, right, that's engaging with your organization, knock that one down first. I mean, even if it's control number 47 and you have 12 above it, knock that one down first, because it's going to reduce your material cyber risk, right? And then it's document everything. Document everything around controls are made out of people and process and technology. So make sure all of that's written down in that system security plan or any appendices for it. And then the final bit of that, that's where you have to have, if you are at CMMC level 2 with prioritized controlled unclassified information, prioritized CUI, that's where you have to have a formal assessment performed by a certified third-party assessment organization. And then out of that, what you'll end up with is a formal assessment. You'll get CMMC, kind of a pass or a fail, but you also get a 6-month requirement. So if you have maybe, you got a score of 98 out of 110, you're allowed to create plans of action and milestones, those POAMs, shorthand, for any gaps that you have, provided you cover down on those in 6 months. Under DFARS, in the past, we were allowed to have kind of a rotating door of POAMs where you could say, well, yeah, this is the plan. We're going to get around to it. We're going to get around to it. And under CMMC level 2, well, just under CMMC, actually, that rotating door, that revolving door closes. So once you get the formal assessment done, you get 6 months to cover any assessment gaps. You re-engage with the formal assessment organization. They'll tell you, hey, you pass or you didn't pass. And that pass or not pass designation, of course, is going to affect your ability to win additional contracts as well as to renew contracts with the Department of Defense.
So I'm going to float something out here, just something you said. I'm going to do a little bit of a deeper dive on it. So when you talk about level 1, the 17 basic controls, and then you also referenced level 3, which had the NIST 800-171 reference, and your quote was table stakes for modern cyber. You said it wasn't trivial, but it's still table stakes. One of the things I think is probably helpful for this team that's listening here today is thinking through a way to make CMMC less scary. Is it's not necessarily doing a bunch of different things. Correct me if I'm wrong, it's institutionalizing, having a plan for stuff that, you quote you here, table stakes for modern cyber. So I was looking at the 44, you referenced some of them on level 1, which was have MFA, but some that I think were a little bit higher is have a plan to respond to threats. That
Yes.
would be on there. And so maybe a little bit more discussion here on a way for a company, and you also use the term mid-size org, but I like it across the board, is a modern cyber should have these things in it anyway. CMMC is a documentation vehicle to show that you're at that level that can then be used to win or maintain your contract. So maybe a little more thought there and to help customers and people that are listening today to say CMMC is actually not quite as scary. It's institutionalizing things that you should already be doing, and maybe a little bit more depth on ways for people then to use that for momentum.
Yeah, I think one of the points to key off there is it's going to certainly make onboarding of new employees a lot simpler, right? So how many times has somebody joined a organization as the new cyber analyst or the systems administrator, and they go, how do we do, insert term here, how do we add a new user? How do we enable multi-factor authentication? How do we do patching? Hey, this vulnerability just came up. Do we have it? Does this apply to us? Do we need to go patch on this, or is this something we should even care about? Having this stuff written down really helps set expectations, right? It helps internally for training. It helps internally for adoption. It also helps everyone understand, here's the cadence of how we do things. So it removes a lot of the ambiguity over what's important and what's not important, because the tendency in the cybers is everything's on fire at all times. And this actually gives us a practical way and mechanism of prioritizing work. The other thing that it definitely does is some of those capabilities at a technology level do actually reduce threat. And they've been shown empirically to reduce threat. And the ability to show that to a, let's say you're trying to get a contract, not in the DoD, right? You're trying to get a contract and somebody sent you their vendor security assessment form, right? And it's inevitably an Excel document. You can say, hey, look, we're doing this data under 171. You need our evidence that we're doing this data under 171, right? We can share you some of that perhaps under NDA if you need it, or you can just take our word for it based on our policies. That's going to make winning business outside of the DoD considerably easier if you're trying to sell to organizations that have got vendor security requirements. And given the state of the world these days, with supply chain threats being kind of one of the new areas of hotness, I don't think that's going to be a hard conversation. And then again, on the conversations around cyber insurance, we see a material ability to use this as evidence of practice to reduce your cyber insurance premiums and to reduce your renewal fees, and hopefully, like the carve outs we're seeing on ransomware, to either get those removed or otherwise stricken so that you can have the full coverage that you want. But the other thing that comes to that, if you're doing all this stuff, if you're doing all of these practices, you have to look at it and say, what do we really need for cyber insurance? Are we at a point where we can self-insure? Is there a point where we're actually paying for something where the likelihood of us getting a payout is pretty low, and where the likelihood of us actually being able to respond and mitigate and shut down a threat in action is very high? It becomes a financial conversation at that point. I'm sure there's probably, CFO could be put together a math model here to say, here's how this reduces our overall costs by leaning in initially to those controls.
Yeah, it's almost like the title of today's session could be 6 steps to prepare, and what other benefits does having a CMMC to provide to the rest of your business?
Mhm.
We have a question in the chat. Thank you very much. Yeah, you referenced CUI in your discussion about level 2 as control unclassified information. And then a little bit later on, you referenced unprioritized CUI. So looks like the question here is prioritized, unprioritized. What's the difference?
So this is one that it's been shifting under CMMC level 2. It used to be called critical to national defense or essential to national defense or non-essential to national defense. And ultimately, if you've got controlled unclassified information, CUI, um, the contract under CMMC level 2 will have language in it indicating if it's prioritized CUI or if it's non-prioritized CUI. And I think the difference here is if you've got, let's say you're making boots for the US Army and they've got a chipset in them because it's Internet of Things, because you want to do telemetry of soldiers on the battlefield, and this is actually a thing that exists in the world today, it's probably going to be prioritized CUI, right? Because that's something that's going out into a theater and it's going to have hostile engagement. And if it could be compromised, people could do interesting stuff with that telemetry, right? From an adversarial perspective, that's probably going to be prioritized. So you can kind of go, yeah, that's probably going to be prioritized CUI. If by comparison, you're making proprietary bootlaces, they don't connect to the internet. They're really cool bootlaces. They have no other things. It's probably CUI. Is it prioritized? I seriously doubt it. But when we actually see the final designation, it'll be in each contractual vehicle that says, hey, look, this is going to have prioritized CUI. The big difference on prioritized CUI ultimately is if you have to have a formal third-party assessment done, or if you can do a self-assessment. Because under CMMC level 2, there's actually 2 assessment mechanisms. One is a self-assessment. And everything the DoD is saying right now is there's not going to be a lot of self-assessment allowed under CMMC level 2. And that's because they've kind of done an inventory of what they do for a living. And they went, yeah, actually, most of this stuff's critical to national defense. It's like it's in our department's name or something. So a lot of it is going to be prioritized CUI, the majority of the contracts. So if you've got a non-prioritized CUI contract, and that's the only contract you win, you can do a self-assessment. You still have to assess and have a senior executive sign off on your adherence to those 110 controls. But if you've got prioritized CUI, that's where you have to have a third-party assessment organization come in and do that that CMMC certification assessment with you. And where that gets interesting, and I think Stacy Bostjanek has also said this, like most companies don't just win one contract, right? If you're doing business with the Department of Defense, it's not a one and done. You're probably doing multiple contracts. Any one of those contracts that has prioritized CUI in it is going to trigger that requirement that you have a certified third-party assessment organization conduct that assessment. So also a way of thinking about that is if you wanted to only do self-assessments, if you never wanted to have a certified third-party assessment organization perform an assessment on you, you'd have to very carefully monitor what your sales and contracts team is doing so that they don't sign anything that has prioritized CUI in there. Because the other fun thing about this, CMMC level 2 prioritized CUI means that's a paid assessment. Right, the Department of Defense is not going to roll up and do this for free. A certified third-party assessment organization also is not going to do this for free. As we've seen, these are generally taking 4 to 6 weeks total calendar time, with maybe one really intensive week of the assessment. And a team of assessors working across all of those controls. So that's the other thing, is that if you've got prioritized CUI, that is driving cost associated with your assessments. Are there
Okay.
other questions from the chat, Howard?
Looks like we got another one. Yes, thank you. We have commercial contracts and contracts with the DoD. Where should we set our assessment boundary?
Boy, that's an interesting one. Um, So this is a cultural topic. It's not necessarily, it's going to feel like this is a technology conversation. It is a organizational behavior conversation. So I'm going to oversimplify. There are two ways to do this. Option A would be, say, because we've got, if your majority, if like more than 25% of your business, I'd say you'd probably go with option A. If less than 25% of business, option B. So option A is everybody's under CMMC. So everybody's going to have those table stake controls applied. Everybody in the organization, from the CFO and the CEO to the person who's working in the mailroom, they're going to have those controls. So for example, if you have a control that requires that CUI is stored in a room that has a door and the door has a lock and the lock has a key, you're going to take all your CUI and you're going to pick it up and you're going to move it into that one room or those two rooms of that floor of your office building, depending on how much CUI you happen to have. All the commercial stuff is going to happen somewhere else, but all the cybery type stuff, all the things like multi-factor authentication or making sure that your email is sent on systems that are stored in the United States and only can be accessed by US persons, all that stuff, that's going to apply to everybody, which is pretty cool. So option A is very simple. Everybody does this, moves to a new place where you can store CUI. You don't have to worry about data leakage. Option B is you create an enclave. And an enclave would say, hey, look, we don't do a lot of CUI work. We don't do much of this stuff. It's not core to our business. And so you'd say, we're going to take our two people who work on federal contracts with the Department of Defense. We're going to give them a new computer. Or we're going to give them a new cloud instance, something like, I don't know, Microsoft GCC High. Of course, for two people, it's probably not the right metric there. I think you'd need more than two, but go with me. And those folks who work on projects for the DoD that touch CUI, they'd only work with that system or those systems that you've given them that have those 110 controls applied. Where that gets hinky, if I am on my computer, like if you think of it, just like, let's say I've got a laptop that's my corporate laptop, and I've got another laptop and it's my CUI laptop, and I want to send a message from one, like it's still me, I just want to send a Teams message to somebody, it gets really annoying because they have to either share pivot to the other laptop to type a Teams message, or then they try to use their normal, if they mostly do DoD work, they try to send a Teams message. It's like, no, you can't contact that person, right? And there become boundaries that show up. And where that really gets to be problematic is if I email a file from the wrong environment, like I've got some DoD thing that I'm working on, some assembly, some diagram, something, and I want to send it to somebody, and I send it to somebody on the commercial side of the house, now you've got a data leak inside of the environment. And it's inside your own organization, and you have to do your whole incident response plan, and you have to do a whole remediation thing, and it's a whole great big headache. So our guidance so far has been, if you're doing like 25% or less of your business is currently DoD, and you're willing to entertain some workflow behavior changes, again, not technology changes, they're underpinned by technology, but it's more about teaching people how to do stuff differently. Go with an enclave. And I used to work with mechanical engineers, electrical engineers, software engineers. They find the enclave works if they've got the one project, but if they've got like a dozen projects they're doing, it becomes really hard for them to remember which project is this and where do I store this file? I just want to store the file. I'm just building something, like the computer should figure it out. That's where that other option, where just put everything into one environment that has those 110 controls, becomes a lot more strategic.
Excellent, thank you. Hey, I just did a quick time check here. We're at T-minus 5 minutes. I want to make sure that if for folks on the phone here, if they got other questions, pop them in the chat. Looks like we got somebody else is typing here. So as that's coming up, I do, I want to pick on a couple things you said in a good way. Pick on, that response on the assessment. What the boundaries should be. It's really a business conversation. Like, how does your business function? It's not a technical conversation. Technical controls are brought in as a secondary to what's important for the way you run your business, which is another interesting way of thinking about things that you've said in this chat today. Some of them have been, these are mom and apple pie security things you should be doing, right? I don't care that it's called CMMC. You should be doing these things. And the second of which is, There's a lot of business decisions that'll drive your technical / security business. Oh, got another question come in here. It's a follow-up almost to the previous conversation or earlier with regards to, should we take a wait and see approach, knowing that CMMC 1 was replaced by 2, should 3 come up, and we've got the countdown clock. So again, a little bit about help us manage our time and efforts here. So go ahead, Kayne.
I wouldn't recommend it.
Okay.
I really wouldn't recommend it at this point, because the risk of not being ready for CMMC. Let's say CMMC gets pushed back 6 months. It's not like the cyber criminals overseas are waiting for you to have your CMMC certificate to say, oh yeah, now we can go attack them. They don't care. They're just doing their job all day long, right? And it's the folks at the APT crews over in China who are trying to exfiltrate intellectual property out of companies. They are not looking for your CMMC level. They don't care about your CMMC level. They don't think in checklists. They don't think in certifications. And so the material benefit of this, beyond having the certification, even if the certification date were to slip, your company is more secure. Your company is going to have less risk. Company is going to have a better time in insurance renewal conversations and in contracts conversations. And the other thing I'll say, if we go back to what Stacy Bosjanek has been saying, and we go back to what Kelly Fletcher has been saying publicly, they're basically putting their careers on the line, and they're saying, we're doing this thing, it's going to happen. We anticipate by March, it's going to the OMB. So if you wait till March and you read the Federal Register, I do, and you see that there's nothing about the CMMC in it, okay, sure, you were right for waiting. But if it shows up on March 1 and it takes a year on average and there's a 60-day public comment period, ain't no way you're going to get there in time.
Okay, good. So I like the way you approach it. Like, yeah, you don't want to do that, and here's why. So wrapping up here, we're approaching 11:45. If you have additional questions, please send them to us at info@Ascent. We'll respond to it. Connect up with any of us via LinkedIn. We'll be sending out a recording link. Kayne, any final thoughts you'd like to leave the team with?
I think really I want to thank the audience for attending, first of all. And I want to leave the audience with a thought. This is something that's a net win for everyone, right? Irrespective of your position in the supply chain. This is a net win for everyone, because this really comes down to protecting our warfighters. Even if you make screws or even if you make tanks, right? Anywhere in that spectrum, this is about protecting people. And it's about protecting your employees as well as your company on a long-term engagement basis. So there are a lot of material benefits associated with leaning in on CMMC.
Excellent, thank you. And again, what some of the things we talked through here is, I'm going to say what you said again. Some of these things are table stakes to be a modern cyber organization. So even if you aren't thrilled that you have to go through the certification, this will make your company, will make it harder for our cyber adversaries. And then the second part that you brought up is, there's a lot of business conversations, like how much do you want to do and why? Those are both important as well. So with that, I'll say thank you. Thanks to everybody for attending. We really appreciate it. As I said, if you have additional questions, please send them to info@ascent.com. We're both, Kayne and myself are both on LinkedIn. You can find us that way and we can connect you up. And likewise, we will be sending out a recording link. Thank you very much. Kayne, thank you. Really appreciate your time.
Thanks so much, everyone.